The Book of Rebekah by Maxwell Sachs, Chapter 2, The Promise. When Eliezer stepped out of his tent, stretching and yawning, his foot crunched down on something that had been left in his doorway. He knew what it was before he lifted his foot to look. It was a small clay bowl, no bigger than the palm of his hand. It was a love token, a gift to the gods that he might be delivered into the waiting arms of whoever had placed the bowl. It was the third one this month. He heard muffled giggling from somewhere nearby as he stooped to pick up the pieces of broken pottery. He didn't want his son to see. "Abba," Eli called from inside. "I'm here, son," he replied, stuffing the pieces into his pocket and keeping his face completely blank. "Breakfast," Eli said sleepily. Yes, I'll drop you off if you hurry up. I mustn't be late for my lord Abraham." Eli appeared, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "They got you with the love bowl again, didn't they?" Eliezer nodded. He'd learned long ago not to lie to his son. The boy was an excellent interrogator. "Marky says that one of them will catch you eventually, and that you should just choose the one with the best cooking and be done with it." Eliezer laughed. "Never take marriage advice from a man that's never been married. Come on, let's get you some breakfast." Eliezer dropped his son with Hannah, the wide-hipped, ruddy-faced woman who ran the camp's cook tent. She was always there, and always ready with a smile and a kind word. "If you can't make yourself useful, then at least try not to get in the way," he told Eli, sitting him down by Hannah's warm oven. "Oh, hush," Hannah scolded, swatting at Eliezer with her massive, doughy hand. "Eli's always welcome to sit with me." Eli beamed as she passed him a steaming flatbread and a little jar of honey to dip it in. The truth was that Eli was incredibly spoiled by the women of Abraham's camp on account of the fact that he was the last child to be born in it, and the last child brought into the world by the great matriarch and midwife, Sarah. Since her tragic death 7 years ago, no baby had been born in Abraham's camp, and many of its women had long since given up trying to conceive. They lived under a dark cloud of infertility, and Eli was the ray of sunshine. "Thank you," Eliezer said solemnly to Hannah, throwing the broken shards of the love bowl into her glowing fire. "Thank you for taking such good care of my son." Hannah raised her eyebrows when she saw the broken love bowl being blackened on the coals of her oven, but said nothing. She knew how to mind her own business, and it was why she was one of the few women Eliezer could bear to be around. With a shy wave of thanks, Eliezer ducked out and walked the short distance to the large and luxurious tent of his master, Abraham. Few people were about so early in the morning, but a giggling and blushing serving girl informed him that the Lady Hagar was already in attendance and had been since first light. She ran away with her hand pressed to her mouth, no doubt eager to share the news of her early morning encounter with the camp's most eligible bachelor. "My lord," Eliezer said, padding softly into the heavily carpeted, overheated room. "My Lady Hagar." "Here he is," Abraham said cheerfully. He was having one of his good days then, Eliezer thought, looking him over carefully. While he still had the massive bulk of a man who had spent years working hard outside in the fields and on the mountains with cattle, sheep and goats, the strength and power had now left his body entirely. His skin was thin, and the veins underneath looked sluggish and vulnerable. His hands were no longer the rough hands of a shepherd. Surrounding him was an air of exhausted vagueness, and whilst he often surprised Eliezer with his sharp insights and cutting humor, those moments seemed to be costing him more and more every time. Now he slept a great deal, his grey and weary face slack as his breath wheezed in and out. "At your service, my lord," Eliezer said, standing straight up, arms tucked in tightly by his side, waiting to receive his master's instructions. "My beautiful wife has just informed me that she will be leaving this afternoon for Egypt," Abraham said, taking Hagar's small brown hand in his own shaking fingers. "You didn't forget that today's the day that I'm leaving," Hagar said to Eliezer sharply. His relationship with Hagar was strained, but unlike other people in the camp, he had never mocked or insulted her in private or in public. He made a point of leaving the room if he ever heard anyone doing so, and that had softened her towards him over the years. "No, my lady, I did not forget. Your sons must be so pleased that the bride hunt has begun, Eliezer said, politely. Hagar snorted. I'm not so sure about that. They seem to have a rather low opinion of women and babies. Abraham's massive, doddering hand found its way to Hagar's bottom, which he patted reassuringly. Don't worry about that. Once they're married, nature will take its course, and your grandchildren will multiply faster than even you can count. Eliezer knew that Abraham had never forgotten the promise he'd received from his God, a covenant that his descendants would form the multitudes of great nations. And since his son by his first wife Sarah was in no hurry to procreate, it was clearly Hagar, the second wife, who was going to provide the most fruitful branch of Abraham's tree. They'll be your grandchildren too, Abraham. Don't forget that, Hagar scolded him. I won't forget it, but I have the feeling I won't be here to see them arrive in the world, Abraham said with a tired sigh. Hagar gave him a reassuring squeeze, but didn't deny it. Rallying his strength, Abraham said, There is something I must do before it's too late. And then he struggled to sit up in his big, soft bed, not so easy for someone so old and so heavy, and coughed. Eliezer heard the rattle deep in his chest. We have very important business to attend to, Eliezer. Well, that's my cue to leave. You know how business bores me, Hagar said, hopping lightly off the giant bed where Abraham lay permanently stranded, the bed in which they had conceived many sons. Abraham chuckled indulgently, and even Eliezer struggled to restrain his smile. Hagar was the most astute business person he'd ever met. The small but indomitable Egyptian woman had built an empire with only her son Ishmael to help her. Now, as Abraham's death loomed, she was making plans to strengthen her position with wives and grandchildren to fill the palace that she had built herself in town. She kissed Abraham on the cheek and swished from the room, her step as light and agile as a young girl's. Abraham watched her leave with a longing sigh, waited a few moments to let the distance between them grow, and then looked cunningly at Eliezer with surprisingly bright eyes. Beckoning him to his side, he whispered, Come closer to me, Eliezer. Draw up a chair and put your hand here under my thigh so that I know you're near me and listening closely. Eliezer did as commanded, and a strong sense of anticipation filled him. It had been a long time since Abraham had given him instructions of any kind, trusting him to know what needed to be done about the place. He slipped his hand carefully under Abraham's long thigh, just above the knee, and with surprising strength, Abraham reached out and grasped his arm, looking him intensely in the eye. It's time to find a bride for Isaac. Loath as he is to accept anything from me, Sarah would have wanted me to see him settled. God willing, my lord, you still have plenty of time, Eliezer said, with genuine distress at the thought of his master's death. I suppose his condition is much the same? Abraham asked. Yes, my lord. I'm afraid Isaac's condition is very much the same. His health continues to be a burden to him, and Eliezer hesitated. This was a touchy subject, and he did not want to enrage the old man in his weakened state. But Abraham finished the sentence for him. And he will not speak my name without first cursing me, Abraham said, shaking his head in disbelief. That's not exactly how I would have worded it, my lord, but that's about the long and the short of it, yes. Eliezer always answered Abraham honestly. It was part of the sacred bond between a great lord and his chamberlain that there were never any secrets between them. Abraham squeezed his arm and looked away, blinking back tears. Can a broken vessel ever be fixed? It would take a lifetime to put all the pieces back together. Eliezer looked down out of respect, while Abraham wiped his eyes, and then said, Could my lady Hagar not bring a bride for Isaac from Egypt? Abraham nearly spat, he sat up so fast. By God, Eliezer, what a thing to say, he cried, in outrage. Then he fell back on his pile of cushions, laughing, fat tears rolling down his withered cheeks. Can you imagine the wedding night? Abraham guffawed. Eliezer laughed too. Poor Isaac. He could hardly imagine him with any woman, let alone a woman who bathed in milk and liked to paint her breasts gold. He attempted to take his hand from under Abraham's thigh to fetch the old man a cloth to wipe his tears, but fast as a snake bite, Abraham's hand shot out and clamped down on Eliezer's wrist, keeping his hand in place. "Do not leave yet, Eliezer, not until I have given you your mission. Perhaps the last mission I will give you, and I pray to God you will not fail me in this last request." The conversation became serious, and Eliezer held himself straight in readiness to accept Abraham's command. "My lord, tell me your wishes that I can make them so. You will be the one to find Isaac a wife. Not Hagar, not me, Eliezer. It will be you who brings us a new queen." Eliezer's stomach dropped. The very thought of brides and weddings made him feel sick. Since the death of his wife, he had avoided women altogether, and yet he could not refuse his master's request. He bowed his head and said, "Yes, my lord." Abraham held Eliezer in his powerful gaze and delivered his command. "Go north to Haran and seek out my family. Though it has been many years since I saw them last, they will not turn you away. Pick a strong, courageous girl from amongst their daughters, and she will be a blessing in Isaac's life, just like Sarah was in mine." Abraham closed his eyes for a moment, and Eliezer knew he was thinking of Sarah, that silent and forbearing soul who had followed Abraham across untold deserts and mountains without a single complaint. Sarah, who had watched Abraham lead her only child up into the mountain to sacrifice him for the glory of God with a long and very sharp knife concealed in his bedroll. She had allowed Abraham to take her boy, watching silently as they walked into the distance. Once they were out of sight, she lay down and she never got up again. When Abraham returned with Isaac by his side, very much alive, it was too late. Sarah was already gone. Her heart was beating and she breathed, but she was gone. Even Isaac's throat-tearing screams couldn't bring her back from the place she had gone to. Sarah died, and Isaac never spoke a single word to his father ever again. It was the beginning of the great rift that forever split Abraham's family into two parts. Eliezer also closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the visceral memory of Isaac's piteous screaming. And when he opened them again, Abraham was patiently waiting. "Will you go?" he asked. Nodding his assurance, Eliezer replied, "I will go." "Thank you, Eliezer, but I must ask you, my lord, shouldn't I take Isaac with me? You know how he is. Wouldn't it be better if he chose for himself?" "Isaac must never leave these lands, Eliezer. They've been given to him by God. And besides, no woman of good birth would take him if she saw him." Abraham chuckled, shaking his head in amused disbelief. No, you must go alone and fetch the bride for Isaac. She'll have to be a courageous type to go with you, and that's a good thing. She'll need all the courage she has to survive Isaac." "And if I find such a girl, but she refuses to come," Eliezer asked, his mind spinning with the possibilities, "then you'll be free of your promise to me, and you and Eli will spend the rest of your lives wearing dresses and making flower garlands with Isaac. We both know I'm not long for this world, and you belong to this family as long as you belong to this earth. When I die, you will serve Isaac as you've served me, and when you die, Eli will take your place." "Yes, my lord," Eliezer said, bowing his head. Abraham patted Eliezer in a grandfatherly way and counseled him. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. God's angels have gone ahead of you to find the woman, and if they aren't help enough, then you'll have my gold." His eyes glittered mischievously. Abraham had worked hard for many years to acquire many lands and great wealth, but for all that, he lived rather frugally. Every now and then, however, he took great delight in spending huge sums on other people. Hagar had understood this from the beginning and built her empire by cleverly investing Abraham's gifts. "All of it, my lord." Eliezer was more than a little bit surprised. "Yes, and the jewels." "All of the jewels, my lord." "Yes, Eliezer, all of the gold, all of the jewels, all of the rugs, the silks, and the perfumed oils. It will be the greatest bride price ever paid, greater even than the price I paid for my dear sister," he said, trailing off as he relived the bitter memories of the past. Eliezer laughed in relief. "Perhaps finding Isaac's bride won't be so difficult after all," Eliezer said, running his hand through his dark, curly hair. His mind was starting to spin with everything he had to do to organize this trip. He was thrilled by the idea of getting away from the stifling pressure of camp gossip and love bowls, but the organizing of it would be a nightmare task. "Perhaps you will bring back a wife of your own," Abraham chuckled, leaving the past behind and focusing on the future. "It's about time you were married." Eliezer's throat went dry, and he coughed, almost choking. "Apologies, my lord," he said, attempting to massage his throat back into life. "Don't panic, that wasn't a command," Abraham said, wheezing with amusement, and then rolling over onto his elbow so that he could look directly into Eliezer's eyes as he choked. "But it's not good for a man to be alone," he said, with grandfatherly affection. Thank you, my lord," Eliezer gasped as air returned to his lungs. "And never forget," Abraham said, leaning back on his pillows with a satisfied sigh, "that marriages are made by God's hands, not our own."